Hi everyone, welcome to the Friday live session. Every Friday we've been talking about different aspects of Australian visas. We finished a series of skilled migration visas. Now we've moved on to the employee nominated visa. So last week we talked about subclass 482, and this week we are going to be talking about subclass 186, a very famous or very important aspects of employee nominated series, subclass 186. So before we begin, I'll just quickly tell you our contact details. If you want to be in touch with us, you can call us on 1300 074 787, or you can email us admin@cirrus.com.au. We are registered migration agents for Australia, so if you have any questions, we are happy to help you. And thank you so much for the viewerships and the questions that's coming through the week about our Friday live sessions. They're getting through to more and more people. So we have some questions. I've got a question from Sirajo. He's saying, I'm interested to work and study in Australia for sponsorship employment, so help me. I had fulfilled all needed categories on platform, so how do I get visa to work in Australia? So that's exactly what we are going to talk about. We are going to talk about the requirements, the benefits of the visa, and how do you get started. And I've got another question from Dorothy. I have a question for you. For those who first want to work in Australia for sponsorship employment, how do we go about it? So if you watch my live video, I'm going to be talking about the requirements, the eligibility, and also what do you have to do to secure employment and go about that. Right, so subclass 186. I have written some notes for you as well. I'm going to be talking about the requirements for all three subcategories. So subclass 186 is the main subclass. Under that there are three sub-streams, if you put it that way. The first one is direct entry, second one is labor agreement, and the third one is TRT. The most popular ones are, I guess, direct entry and TRT, but there is a whole different sector called labor agreement. So labor agreement is when an employer already is a party to a labor agreement. So they already have pre-negotiated requirements for age, skills, and English mainly, because they want some exempted people, or it's an industry where they're struggling to find people. So they already have a negotiated labor agreement for most of the criteria. If you have an employer that already has a labor agreement in place, then you will go under the labor agreement stream for subclass 186. I will compare the other two streams during the live session today. I will go through each and every requirement from the employee's perspective and also the employer's perspective. So, what is subclass 186? It is Australian permanent residency. So once you get the subclass 186 as an applicant, you immediately become an Australian permanent resident. You don't need to apply for any other visas. You can stay in Australia permanently. So with subclass 186, first of all, you need an Australian company to give you a nomination, which means that Australian company has to provide you with a job or to promise to provide a job once the visa gets approved. This employment, because it is for permanent residency, the employment should be at least ongoing for 2 years, but the contract cannot say it is just for 2 years. So that is a requirement if you are nominating an employee to come to Australia under subclass 186. Also, the employer has to make sure, if you're paying your employee under $250,000, you are paying the employee the market salary rate. So for example, you have to go by which occupation that you're hiring and what sort of experience this employee has. Based on that, you have to do labor market research, or if you already have a agreement that's in place, individual agreement with the employee, somehow you have to make sure that you are paying them the market salary. You're not trying to pay them anything less than what you would normally pay to an Australian for the same occupation. And also from the business's perspective, it has to be an eligible business, which means the business must be running in Australia legally, and they've done all their accounting, they've done all their registrations. So from the business side, they have to make sure that it is an eligible business. And also from the business side, they have to make sure that the position genuinely exists within the business. Someone was covering that position before and now it become vacant, or it is a new position that is coming into the business. And that is why you require someone to fulfill this position. So that is mainly the requirement from the employer's side. As long as the employer can fulfill all these requirements, they can become a nominator for a subclass 186 visa application at the fee from the employer side. So if you're an employer wanting to nominate someone for subclass 186, the main application nomination fee under the direct entry stream is $540. Under the TRT stream, which is the temporary resident transition stream, it's $540 again if it's in the metropolitan area, but if it's in the regional area, there is no application fee. Apart from the application fee, are there any fees for the employer? Yes, there are SAF levy. It's an labor levy that they have to pay, which it depends on the employer's turnover. If an employer has turnover of less than 10 million, they have to pay $3,000. Both under the direct entry and TRT stream. If the turnover is above 10 mil, then the employer has to pay $5,000. This SAF levy is a one-off fee that needs to be paid at the time of nomination, and it is not per applicant, it is for the main applicant. That even if the main applicant wants to include other family members into the application, this is just one fee. But it is per applicant though. For example, if the employer wants to get 2 or 3 people under subclass 186, then they have to pay these fees per applicant. So that is from the employer side for the nomination under both direct entry and TRT stream. Now I will go and break down the criteria from the applicant side for direct entry and TRT stream, and I will compare the two so you can understand them better. Right, so what is direct entry stream and what is the requirement? If an applicant is interested in, or if they want to apply for subclass 186 visa from an employer nominated stream, subclass 186 direct entry, the applicant needs to meet few entry criteria. Number one is they need to obviously have an eligible employer who is willing to give them the nomination, which is a permanent full-time employment contract for at least 2 years or plus, and they need to go through all the requirements of the nomination for this employee. So that is the very first requirement. You need to have an Australian employer who is willing to nominate you for subclass 186. The second requirement is the main applicant has to be under 45 years of age when we lodge the visa application. The third requirement is the main applicant has to have competent English. The family members who are over 18 needs to have functional English. If they don't have functional English, there is another option to pay the second visa application fee. But they must pay the second visa application fee, or they must have functional English. The third requirement is you need to have an occupation in the relevant list. So when it comes to subclass 186, the relevant list is called MLTSS. So that's again a very important requirement. MLTSS stands for medium to long term skill occupation list. You must have an occupation in the MLTSS list if you want to be eligible for subclass 186. So that is the current requirement, and there has been some proposed changes coming to this occupation list. So we are eagerly waiting to see how these lists are going to change, if they're going to consolidate them or if they're still going to exist. But as of now, if you want to apply a visa under subclass 186, you must have an occupation in the MLTSS list. Right, now the skills assessment. So I talked about subclass 482 last week and how only some occupations need skill assessment, but if you're going under subclass 186 direct entry, you must have a skill assessment in your nominated occupation. Also, you must have qualified 3 years work experience, that is full-time equivalent. Again, this is an interesting requirement. We get asked questions a lot regarding this employment work experience. So to break it down or to explain it very clearly to you, when it says qualified, you first need to have a skill. According to Australian ANSCO, every occupation has a skill level. So I'll go through a few occupations. For example, an accountant needs a skill level 1, which means needs a bachelor's degree. So when I say skilled employment work experience, which means a person needs to have a bachelor's degree plus 3 years full-time work experience or full-time equivalent work experience if they want to be eligible for subclass 186. This full-time requirement changed some time ago. They used to only accept permanent full-time work experience for subclass 186, but they went and changed this requirement. They say we will accept casual, we will accept part-time work experience as well, as long as we count it pro rata, which means if you have worked 1 year part-time, it is considered as 6 months full-time. But somehow you need to have a skill plus 3 years work experience. The next requirement is you can apply for this visa from within Australia or from outside Australia. So the main applicant can be in Australia or outside Australia. Unlike subclass 482, the secondary applicants can be anywhere. So they don't need to be at the same time, at the same place as the main applicant. For example, most of our main applicants are currently in Australia, but their family members are back home. So when we lodge subclass 186, when the main applicant wants to include the whole family, we lodged a combined application, but main applicants here, but the family members are back home, and we can do that for subclass 186. The main applicant and if they're in Australia, they need to hold a substantial visa or bridging visa A, B or C. So we cannot apply for 186 from bridging visa E. It has to be A, B or C or a substantial visa. Sometimes people have substantial visas with no further stay conditions or other conditions. For subclass 186, it is fine to have no further stay condition. That condition will automatically be waived when we are lodging a subclass 186 visa onshore. So that is the requirement only if you're onshore, but if you're offshore, it doesn't matter. You don't need to hold any Australian visa. You can just lodge it from offshore and you can come to Australia once the visa is granted. I already talked about the family members English requirement, which is functional. Now I'll go through the TRT stream. So what is TRT stand for? It means temporary resident transition. There has been a lot of talks about this TRT as well. In the past, even until today, people are only eligible to apply for subclass 186 under TRT if their occupation is on the medium to long term list. But there has been talks and there's going to be new changes coming into place, which we are waiting. We still haven't seen it. It's people who are on the short term list on 482 visas are also going to be eligible to apply for subclass 186 under TRT. That was really big news. We got so many phone calls from existing clients who were cooks and other occupations that were on the short term list. Now these people will be eligible for subclass 186 TRT. Right, so what is the requirement for subclass 186 TRT? Again, when we apply for the subclass 186 TRT, the main TRT stream, the main applicant has to be under the age of 45. Main applicant needs to have competent English. Secondary applicant only needs to have functional English. The biggest benefit of going under the TRT stream is you don't need to have a skill assessment. So an applicant going through the direct entry stream, you need to have a skill assessment. But if you go through the TRT stream, you don't need to have a skill assessment. Again, the application fees for the employer is $540 if it's in the metropolitan. If the occupation is located in, the position is located in regional, then there is no application fees. Still, the employer has to pay the SAF levy, $3,000 if the turnover is under 10 mil and $5,000 if the turnover is over 10 mil. For an applicant to be eligible for subclass 186 TRT, they need to be working for their current nominating employer under subclass 482 for 3 years. This requirement under subclass 457 was only 2 years, then it changed to 3 years. So there are some applicants who's falling under grandfathering for subclass 457 who are eligible to apply for TRT stream just in 2 years. But if not, if you are in your 482 visa working for an employer, as of now you need to work for 3 years to be eligible for subclass 186, and those 3 years has to be with the same nominating employer. So what I mean is, if you worked for one employer and in the middle you changed your employer and you moved to a different employer, your 3 years starts from the beginning. But when the new changes come into place, it will go down to 2 years. So you need to only work for your employer for 2 years, and then you will be eligible for a subclass 186 TRT without a skill assessment. So that's a great benefit, because we have some applicants or some clients who are a bit hesitant to go for the skills assessment. Then they don't need to have a skill assessment, they can just go through the 186 TRT stream. But they need to be first on a 482 visa for the same employer for 2 years, 3 years now, but that requirement will change to 3 years. So that is the main requirement for employer nominated visa subclass TRT, subclass 186 TRT stream. Now let's look at the labor agreement stream. So as I mentioned, all these requirements, why I didn't list anything under labor agreement is because most of these requirements are already pre-negotiated when it comes to labor agreement. So for example, some employers want people who are a little older than 45. Some employers have a need for people who doesn't have that English skill level. Or sometimes they need people without a skill assessment. So it can be different industries, different requirements, different needs for the employer. So the government has looked at these ones and they have already pre-negotiated conditions. So that's why there is a labor agreement. So if your employer already has a labor agreement, then none of these requirements may apply to you if you apply under the labor agreement stream. Now let's look at the visa application fees. So visa application fees went up by some percentage as of 1st of July. Right now, the visa application fees under direct entry labor agreement or TRT for the main applicant is $4,640. If you want to include dependents, obviously there's going to be other fees as well. Dependents over 18 has a different fee. Dependents under 18 again has a different fee. Right, what are the other main, a lot of people do ask us, how do we go about it if we are offshore? So if people are offshore, what I have seen talking to many clients is they need to first secure employment. So they get in touch with employers. What I can suggest is there are some recruiters in Australia that you can get in touch with to try and find employment, or there are some websites like Seek, Indeed or LinkedIn or Jora, you can try to see what job openings are there in Australia, and you can try to apply, but then do tell your employer or a potential employer when they call you for an interview that you are looking for employee nominated visa, because you don't have a visa to come to Australia. Some employers are willing, some employers are not willing to sponsor you for visas, but if they are happy, then we are looking at either 482 visa or subclass 186 visa. So you first need the employer and the offer letter and all these documents from the employer, and then you fulfill your requirements, what I just mentioned earlier: your age, your English, your skills assessment, your family members' English. Once you fulfill all these requirements, then together with the employer's sponsorship and the nomination, you can apply for the visa, either subclass 482 or subclass 186. Then with that visa, you can come to Australia to start your employment. So this is how the process works. So for people who are already in Australia, a lot of people are aware of this requirement, and you can go ahead with this visa subclass. But if you're offshore, then try through one of these websites or through a recruiter to find employer, then we can go through this process. The visa processing times for subclass 186 is currently 90% of the applications are processed between 10 to 11 months. But subclass 482, which I talked about last week, has a really quick processing time. It's about 2 to 3 weeks now. Actually, it's extremely fast. So for some people, because subclass 186 takes such a long time, they first come to Australia under subclass 482, and then they apply for subclass 186 later once they're in Australia, because it doesn't matter how long it takes if you're already here and if you're working. Right, so I hope you understand a little bit more about subclass 186. So the best thing to start is have a look at the MLTSS list, see if your occupation is on that list. If so, I think you are one step closer, and you can start looking at English and skill assessment and an employer. Or if you already have an employer, you can approach them and ask for subclass 186. Thank you so much for listening in. I hope you learned something today. If you have any further questions, please get in touch with us. As I said earlier, our phone number is 1300 074 787, or you can email us admin@cirrus.com.au. A lot of news is coming in the next couple of weeks, so if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do so. We are coming up with all the latest news to you. We are trying to be the first to give you all the news coming up for the new financial year. If you haven't liked us on Facebook, please do so. We again give a lot of information out there for you through Facebook, YouTube and TikTok. Thank you so much for listening in. I'll see you next Friday.